But before that, we'll talk about the DevOps story, the evolution of agile organizations. And this goes back to the turn of the century. So we're going to start talking about like the beginning of the century when Henry Ford created something called as assembly line. Now before this assembly line, in the world of manufacturing, especially the car manufacturing, you had to take your engineers to the customer's place where you are actually delivering the car, ship all the components, and then assemble it there, and that was expensive, that was a slow, and that was not a way to do the mass manufacturing, right? And that's what Henry Ford changed with the assembly line. With assembly line, he brought the machines, brought the cars to the workers, and he emphasized on the quality of the components so that everything sort of works together, and set up an assembly line where you can actually mass produce the cars, which made it cheaper, which made it a more commonplace, and that was the beginning of the manufacturing revolution. Now, he started this concept of mass manufacturing. However, that was the beginning, that was the evolution, right? So, however, it led to certain issues such as over manufacturing, for example, right? So you keep on manufacturing car because you just have capacity, even if customers are don't require that particular model, and that's when Toyota started doing things differently, right? And why we're talking about this is because when we talk about DevOps actually originated from some of these philosophies, and that's why we're going back to the history and trying to learn from the beginning, so that unless we know where we come from, we won't know where we're going, right? And that's the reason why we're talking about this. And Toyota changed the story. They started, experimenting, and this guy Taiichi Ohno is attributed to the Toyota's transformation and Toyota, what we call as a Toyota production system. And with Toyota production system, they basically focused on relentlessly working on eliminating waste from the manufacturing process. Now, what is a waste? Waste is any overproduction that you do that is not necessary. Waste can be of different types. There are 8 types of waste actually. Waste is waiting in line for, let's say some part to arrive, or not doing anything, just waiting for it to happen, right? Waste can be, you can waste an inventory, you can, there could be waste in the transportation, there could be overprocessing. So they defined 8 types of waste, and they started optimizing by reducing the waste in the manufacturing process, right? And it was also called as just-in-time production, right? So basically based on the customer's demand, and you set up a process so that only when there is a demand, there is a requirement, you start manufacturing and you optimize that process, right? And then it was also a pull-based model. What Ford created was a mass production, which was a push model where you push it from the line. So you have inventory, you just go and produce it, right? In case of Toyota TPS, it was a pull model. So only if you are available, you basically optimize the work in progress, you avoid the bottlenecks, you reduce the waste, reduce the waiting, and that's when they started talking about, just-in-time production, pull model like Kanban, and Kanban is, we use Jira and we use Trello and so on. That was the beginning of the Kanban process, right? And then also what they created was a value stream mapping. Value stream mapping is you come up with the process, and that involves your flow of materials as well as information flow as well, right? Information flows from, let's say, the customer, and the customer places the order, it goes to the supplier, and supplier releases the materials. So it starts from the material coming in, and then you come up with your process. So the work centers, so it goes from work center A to B to C to D, and you create a value stream with, you measure every single work as well as you measure the queue time. So how long it takes for that person to be available, right? And based on that, you create process time, you create cycle time, and based on that, you create your efficiency, and that tells you your lead time. And how is it related to IT? We're going to talk about it later. We're going to actually convert our work into value stream, and that's what DevOps talks about as well, right? So that was the beginning of the value stream mapping. And based on that, you come up with your efficiency and the lead times, and based on that, you release the material, that you require, right? So that's where the value stream mapping. Now, Toyota created this TPS, but that was later on known to be as lean production. So that was the predecessor of lean production actually. So James P. Womack wrote about it in his book in 1990 called The Machine That Changed the World. That's when he codified this DevOps, talked about this TPS, which was later on known as lean production. Now, looking at this lean production, a lot of companies, manufacturing companies started adopting this TPS or what we call as lean production, which was a just-in-time production. And inspired by that, a lot of organizations, especially the IT organizations, started thinking about why can't we use that? Maybe we can start implementing that or working around it and start experimenting around it. And that was the beginning of came to be known as lean IT actually. Right, so that was the lean in 1990 when IT organizations started experimenting this just in time and reducing waste and so on and so forth. The other thing that happened in 1984 was this book called The Goal, and it's actually a fantastic book. Anybody who wants to know or learn about some management philosophies or how to optimize your organization, you should definitely read about this. This is a fantastic book, and where Ellie Goldratt talked about something called as theory of constraint. And again, theory of constraint was in parallel to what TPS did as well, right? And it talks about identifying the system constraints. So let's say in our case, let's say you have a constraint, you are building software in an agile fashion, but when you go to the deploy, it takes 4 weeks to do that, right? That is a constraint. So you identify the constraints in the system and you start exploiting those unless you elevate or mitigate those constraints, and you keep repeating the process, right? And the idea is if you want to improve the flow of work, you want to improve the lead time so that you're able to change faster, you are able to deploy things faster, you're able to make changes faster, right? And that's when 2001 was when Agile Manifesto was published, and Agile is an umbrella for all such lean and some other processes, some other methods, and what came to be known as extreme programming, Scrum, Kanban, there's DSDM and FTD and lean. So Agile is a sort of an umbrella process for it, and it talks about iterative, incremental software development. Now I'm going to emphasize on that software development because that was the beginning of the conflict between the development and what we call as operations today. Why? Because if you look at Agile actually changed the way we were building the software, and it was a very, very effective method. However, what Agile left out was you're building software faster, you're building it in batches, but what happens after that? You hit a wall, and that's where ops comes in. Right? Because you're not including ops in this methodology, in this process, you're not considering those. And that created chronic conflict between development and operations. And that's when, what happens is you are building the software in batches, you want to release it fast. But ops cares about the stability and reliability of the systems, and operations has not moved to the agile methodology that you're following. So the deployment process has not changed. The way we are deploying the software, the way it has been monitored, everything is sort of the same. So you're not including ops in the journey, and that's where people started talking about how to resolve this chronic conflict. So the chronic conflict between the dev and ops. So that's the famous wall of DevOps that you might have seen in most of the articles. So when people talk about DevOps, it's basically this wall they show, right? And this is because of this. Agile started talking about software development, but the operations was not moved to it, and operations didn't know about what's being thrown at them, the software, right? Because you're not involving operations in the process of building it, or they don't have the know-how of what is happening. And the other thing that would happen is with Agile, you are done with your feature. Once you've written the code, once you've tested it, you're done. It's not done until you deploy it actually, right? So that was what left out. And what would happen as a result of that is, as a developer, you would not care about the non-functional requirement such as scalability, reliability of the software, and what happens when there are defects in the software. It results in the outage, and that's what ops was fighting. So they didn't know what was there, what are they fighting for, and that's where this chronic conflict, or that's where this invisible or whatever wall was. People started thinking about those things, right? So there were some people, some organizations who were trying to fix this or resolve this chronic conflict, and one such person was named Patrick Dubois. Now, what Patrick did, his contribution is significant because what he did was in 2008 Agile conference in Toronto, Canada, he published a paper which talked about Agile infrastructure and operations. It was the Agile conference, and he talked about Agile infrastructure, but we were not interested in that at that point of time, talking about it, right? Because mostly people were talking about the development methodologies, and that didn't attract a lot of people actually there. However, there was another person who had, published a talk or a sort of a birds of feather session on Agile infrastructure actually, and it was nobody really cared about it, so nobody showed up except for one guy, Patrick Dubois. In fact, the person who had announced it was not there because he didn't receive any response, right? But he tracked him down, and they started talking about this chronic conflict, and what they started was Agile Systems Administrator Group. Now, what happened after that was they started this group and they started gaining momentum, and then what happened after that, 1 year after that, in 2009 Velocity Conference, this very famous talk called 10 plus deploy a day, DevOps cooperation at Flickr. And there were a couple of guys from Flickr, John Allspaw and Paul Hammett, who talked about it, right? And what they talked about was how to resolve this chronic conflict between the dev and operations. Why? Because that's what they could do when they resolved it. They could achieve like 10 plus deploys per day by resolving this conflict. They actually started offering a solution, and they had actually implementing something where they could actually seek the collaboration between dev and ops, right? And how did that was through tools and the culture. And that's when they started talking about, okay, you could possibly achieve that as well by automating infrastructure, by using common shared version control. You could automate your build process. You could share the metrics. The same metrics you could possibly use dev and ops, right, to get a visibility. You could add feature flags and things like that, so that operations doesn't have to fight fires when your features are in the production. You could just switch or toggle something, and then you're back to your previous releases, right? And there were a cultural aspect as well. So that actually led to Patrick organizing the first DevOps Days session in Ghent, Belgium in 2009, and that was called as DevOps Days. Now, DevOps Days raised a lot of eyeballs, and a lot of people actually started talking about dev and ops cooperation, and that's when they started the conversation, and then conversation continued on Twitter. And since Twitter, we have very restricted length of word that you could use. It got changed to DevOps. And that's what DevOps for you. That was the beginning, and that's the story of how DevOps came into being, and that conversation still continues.